Yo YouTube, welcome back to another Dragon Ball Sparking Zero video, and today it's a little different than usual. Today I'm going to be talking about the different types of buffs in Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, and the first one we'll start off with, we're going to jump right into it, is the melee buff. And the symbol for the melee buff, how you know you have it, is if you have the strong symbol, in other words, the giant arm, and that is how you'll identify that you have that buff. Now, depending on the character, you can either have a great buff or a small buff. And how that works is usually you'll have a little number on the side, and if it just has no number, that means you're at 1. If you have 2, that means you have 2 stacks of that buff. If you have 3, you got 3 stacks. And if you have 4, you have 4 stacks. And that is how it works. I know some examples of 3 Super Saiyan 4 Goku. Some examples of 4 can be Super Saiyan Blue Vegeta when he goes into his Blue Evolved and he uses his other unique skill. And another is Corrupted Zamasu, the one with the Gunner arm. He also has those buffs, and that causes him to really hit hard as well. Now, depending on these buffs, they can last from 15 seconds to the whole match to like 3 seconds. Super Saiyan 4 Goku, by the way. But yeah, these buffs, they can make a difference depending on who's using them. Goku can go from a 7,000 base simple square combo to a 9,000 damage combo from just that simple square, not even triangle, just simple square combo to the little slam down. And like I said, depending on what character you're using and how you can make use of the buff, it can be very useful. I wouldn't say it changes the match and how you fight and how you play. It's just there for if you want to get some good burst damage off, and it's very helpful in certain situations. So the next buff we'll be talking about is the beam buff, and how you can see that you have that buff is if you have a little beam symbol, kind of like the Kamehameha or the Galick Gun, how that looks when they come out. And it works the same way as the melee buff, except for it makes a little bit bigger of a difference. Now, just like the melee buff, it affects your supers and your combos. So say you're playing Future Gohan and you have that beam buff up. He has special beam cannon and hyper Masenko. That can be really helpful to him. That beam buff does buff those beams quite a bit, and they can also be stacked as well. Beam buffs last the same amount of time as the others depending on the character that you're using. So usually for higher tier characters, 15 seconds. I know you can see it on Gogeta Super Saiyan 4 and MUI Goku, and I think the Gogetas as well. That is how you're able to identify those buffs, and that buff is actually quite useful in some fashions. So because of how some of the beams work in the game, if you manage to get a class and you have that beam buff up, that damage is almost equivalent to an ultimate. That can take 2 bars of health easy. That's excluding if you decide to boost that move. And they can be really helpful, like I said, depending on the situation. But I would use that more. I would say that it's more useful than the melee buff, in my opinion, since people can just super counter and Z vanish your combos, although it is very helpful. Now, the next buff we're going to talk about is the Ki recovery buff, and you can tell that you have it by having a little Goku symbol with aura around him. And that buff is pretty good, especially if you have been playing ranked matches or just any sort of PvP at all. You can really feel the difference. You don't have to charge as much. You can kind of just go on without worrying about it. I think it charges slightly faster than Android charges, and it's just really useful, man. I've had times where I don't need to charge for a while just because I have that buff, and it allows me to, first of all, vanish longer, dash, use more key blasts, use more supers, all of that good stuff. That buff is really helpful, and it's pretty good to have in PvP. Now, again, MUI Goku has this buff. I don't know why the devs just decided to give him every buff under the sun, but he does have that buff, and that is really useful to have. Now, moving on to our next buff, we will be talking about the Blast Defense buff. And what this does is basically reduce some of the damage that you've taken. Again, like the beam buff and the melee buff, it can be stacked on top of each other, and it actually reduces the damage by quite a bit. It's actually really useful. It can come in handy in certain situations, like if you're getting hit by an ultimate. The odds of you stacking this buff are actually relatively high, depending on what character that you're using. Like, say that you're using Team Super Saiyan Gohan, or say that you're, again, using Blue Vegeta. He's able to have that buff twice, and I've seen it be able to be a detriment. It's actually pretty useful. It reduces quite a bit of damage, and in certain situations, it helps you survive an ultimate with a bit more health that you would be able to recover and make a good comeback with. So that would be the defense buff, and the way you'd be able to tell you have that buff is if you have the 3 dots. It looks like an arrow. They're squares, and again, it'll have numbers by it, and that's how you're able to tell how many stacks of that you have. Now, to the most useful buff in the game, the defense buff is so damn broken, it doesn't make any sense at all. Now, the reason why it's broken is because it can give characters that either have super armor or no super armor more freaking armor. It doesn't make sense. It's broken, and it's actually extremely useful. This is what makes Android 19 so good, because you're able to use false courage and just grab people though they're attacking you. Now, you're not immune to heavy attacks or the final attack of an M1 string, and you're also not immune to vanish assaults. But the buff is so good, it's ridiculous. Now, I will say you have to have at least 2 of the defense buffs up, and usually false courage, it gives you 2 of those defense buffs, which makes it pretty good. What makes false courage one of the best utility skills in the game is the fact that it calls 1 bar and it gives you 2 of those defense buffs. Now, I will say it is rare that I found someone to not have a skill that gives them 2 defense or just 1 defense. 1 defense, it's okay. It doesn't really make a difference. You can survive a few hits. It doesn't really make a difference. Now, when you get to 2 and above, that's where it gets insane. Like I said before, you actually feel like a Broly with any other character. This goes for Piccolo, for example, when he's fused with Kami, or Roshi. This is what makes them so good. That false courage buff, I know I'm sucking it off. I understand, but this is what makes those skills so good, because they cause 1 bar, you get super armor, and you're able to beat the absolute living crap out of anyone that you're fighting. This can be pretty good for fighting Vegetos as well, depending on the situation. And that is because if the Vegeto is aggressive when they're using that buff, you can just grab them. They can still teleport behind you, so be aware of that, because if you get hit in the back, you're still screwed. But at the end of the day, the buff is so good generally in most situations, it doesn't it barely has any drawbacks. The only drawback is that it doesn't last long enough for some characters. I know DBZ Gogeta, his immovable stance, it's okay only because there are others with the same buff, but it costs 1 bar less and you can use it more often. That's what makes DBZ Gogeta so mid, which is unfortunate. But my point still stands. The defense buff is the best buff in the game. That'll be the end of the video. Let me know if y'all enjoyed. I will make more informative videos like this. If y'all found this useful, let me know. Comment down below. Subscribe so y'all can check in. And I will see y'all next time. Y'all enjoy y'all's time, guys. Peace.